Hi, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel. My name is Mark and I tinker with bikes and occasionally get to ride them too. Today's video is all about this Moulton, its journey, and to be quite honest with you, how it got too expensive. See, I'm always on the lookout for potentially interesting projects, even when I shouldn't be, and this Moulton really grabbed my attention. Sure, it was a rusty mess, but we like a challenge here, right? I ended up picking it up for around £30 and had big plans to restore, upgrade and sell on. At least that was the plan. I'd done no research or budgeting beforehand and my plan was literally just that: buy, restore, upgrade and sell. I'd done no research. I didn't know about the Moulton's quirks, whether parts are still available or how much it might cost. And with these old bikes, you really need to think about these things. Believe it or not, this bike in particular was Moulton's Dulux offering in the 60s. A full suspension, small wheeled city bike with a 4-speed hub, and by full suspension I mean it had a head shock in the front and a block of rubber between the frame and the swing arm. Small wheel bikes were all the rage, and while Rally were pumping up the numbers with the RSW, Moulton were adding a bit more luxury with their offerings. The head shock is a really cool design. I guess much like Cannondale's latest designs, the Moulton shock was built into the steerer, allowing rigidity in that long unsupported head tube while adding a bit of comfort for the ride. I would have loved to have dived into that a bit more, but you'll see later on that the shock on mine is a bit stuck internally. Speaking of research, if you're thinking about restoring one of these early Moulton F frames, it's worth checking out moultonbuzz.com. I did a lot of reading on there during and after stripping down this bike and learned a thing or two. One was, as Moulton's popularity grew, they opened a mass production facility in Kirkby, and by all accounts, those bikes didn't fare well. There seemed to be a lot of quality control issues there, from bad brazing, overheating welding, and any restorer's worst nightmare, a lack of grease. I also found out that early designs of the swing arm were susceptible to twisting and cracking near the bridge. Fortunately mine didn't have that problem, but it's something to look out for and perhaps look into getting reinforced before going any further. On a bike like this one, rust is always going to be my number one enemy. I was always going to have to deal with some seize bolts, but one of the biggest problems with these older British frames is they're not bolts, they're machine screws with slotted heads. When these get rusty and seized into the frame, it's so easy to slip and destroy the head. I'll always spray the bike down in some penetration spray beforehand, but if it still won't budge, a little bit of heat goes a long way. I use my trusty blowtorch on a few of these screws to release them, but it's also important to get a good fitting screwdriver, and preferably a short stubby one for those stubborn screws. A longer screwdriver is just going to add more chance to twist, slip and ruin the head. The rear brake caliper on this bike was an absolute nightmare to get off. For all its life, that nut has been exposed to all the elements and rust has taken over. It welded that thing in place. It doesn't help either that it sits so close to the edge and a regular socket struggled to fit over the top. I think I managed to knock a socket on, but the rust was so bad that I ended up stripping the nut. It was just spinning around the bolt and wouldn't come off, so I ended up cutting it off. Unfortunately, that means this caliper is fit for the scrap pile now, unless you can find a replacement bolt assembly, but after 60 years, that's not likely. Something I learned after stripping down the bike: that swing arm is not meant to come apart like that. The rubber is meant to be glued on from both sides, and the side it's separated from is a plate that sits in the frame, which is held in by 3 screws. I should have taken that apart first, but fortunately these can be re-glued. The pivot bolt that I knocked out can also be purchased still, which is fortunate because mine was, again, pretty damn rusty and it got a little bit damaged knocking it out. Okay, well, I think. Yeah. Okay. Now this bike should have come with front and rear carriers, or at least it has the option for both, but mine only had the rear. It's an interesting design. It slides down the frame and clamps in place with the help of a strut on the top and bottom. The bottom strut screws were a bit of a nightmare to release, but we got there in the end with a few heat cycles. I should note I am aiming to replace all the machine screws used with M5 stainless bolts after retapping the holes where possible. The rack was really beaten up. It was bent and twisted, but fortunately the light gauge steel tubes it uses could pretty easily be bent back into shape. Bit by bit I clamped each rail in the vise and twisted it back into shape until it seemed to be symmetrical and flat. Cutter cranksets and bottom brackets are always fun, aren't they? The cutter pins can be an absolute nightmare to remove. I always get questions about this tool when it's shown because it makes life so much easier. It's a cutter pin press. I found it on eBay after someone had made a small batch based on the design of the Bikesmith design press. If you need one, Bikesmith Design do still sell them. They make life so much easier, but if you don't have one, you can always knock out the pins with a hammer and drift. Just make sure the bottom is supported with a hole for the pin to drop into. It's very easy to bend and mushroom these pens if they put up a fight. And yes, bonus point to those that have noticed, the non-drive side arm is actually on backwards. It's always interesting to see the condition of these original bottom brackets. How has 60 years of service treated them?
That's clean.
I've seen them anywhere from still filled with grease to bone dry and dusty, from barely requiring any pressure to remove to welded into the frame.
Well, okay, that's not even...
Fortunately, by some miracle, this bottom bracket was nicely greased up and the normally troublesome fix cup was loose. I could almost unwind it with my hand. The excellent cups did need to be replaced though. There was a bit of pitting on both surfaces. I left the headset to last because it was very tight. Normally with a tight headset you can just stick the front wheel back in and hold that between your legs while you crank on the headset nut. This can lead to twisting of the fork though if the nut is extremely tight. So to minimise that, I waited until the frame was stripped and then clamped the fork legs in my vise. Clamping them as high up as possible reduces the risk of twisting and allows me to get a good amount of torque on that nut. And it works. The headset on this bike I think was an original TDC unit. It uses the smaller 1/8 inch bearings, but don't ask me how many because I've got no idea. Both races were in pretty good condition still, but the trouble came with removing the cups from the frame. I ended up using the longest screwdriver I could find and gently knocking the cups out bit by bit. A regular headset tool is not going to work in this situation, so just be prepared. Now I did try and strip down the fork. I wanted to give it a service and see how it worked, but Rust had other plans.
It is another cold day.
The fork is one sealed unit, with I believe an elastomer and spring mechanism inside. It needs to be released from the top and the bottom. Unfortunately for me, water had got past the stem and collected in the steerer, rusting the top machine screw for the shock mechanism. I tried soaking with all the sorts of penetrant, but nothing was working. So I made a start on the bottom. You have to knock a pin out and then pull out a cap, and then in theory, the large spring and elastomer should drop out, if it's not rusted in place. While the mechanism still works on my fork, the spring has rusted itself to the internal walls of the steerer, and it was not coming out. It's unfortunate, but at least it still works. Now, after that, a lot of time passed. In that time, I tried to tackle cleaning up the original parts while also buying a bunch of new parts, and costs soon added up. I did originally want to replace all the chrome steel parts with new aluminium parts to get rid of any rust and to reduce weight. Spending £15 on a new seat post or £16 on a new stem honestly isn't too much. But then there's the brake levers at £20, the new shifter at £19, new Nito bars at £38, and then you realise the cheap bike you bought is getting a bit out of hand. That's why I started to try and clean up the original gear. Evaporust does a lot of work here. Soaking the parts in a big Evaporust bath saved a lot of time, and it showed some of the parts weren't actually too bad. The brake levers and shifter still really need to be replaced, but the bars, stem and seat post should be fine. I did a lot of work cleaning up the parts with some fine wire wool and autosol polish, and they did clean up well, but in the back of my head I still want to replace everything with new, and I would have, until I priced up the wheels. You see, the wheels on this Moulton didn't look too bad, but after stripping back the old fabric tape and trying to clean up the inside of the rim, I soon found rust. A lot of rust. It was so bad in places that I could just poke a hole through, so the rims were officially relegated, and this brings a bit of an issue. The wheels this bike uses are 16-inch, but not any normal 16-inch. They're the same size 16-inch that the Brompton uses, and it seems Brompton tend to use 28 spokes. They also have a much narrower front fork than most bikes, so just buying a new wheel set is out of the question. The cheapest 36-hole rims I could find on SGS cycles were £35 a rim. Add on spokes and you're looking at another £25 to £30, so £100 for new wheels, and then tyres, tubes and tape on top. This is where, for me, a £30 bike was turning into a £400 plus build. It's about this point that I weigh up my options and come to the decision that it's just not worth it for me. For me, it's not a bike that's going to get any form of regular use, so it's not a keeper. And for anyone looking to buy a Moulton, £500 is probably going to be highly excessive for a bike. It's something I really should have looked at closely to begin with, and sure, there are probably ways to cut corners and finish it, but I don't know. Once that realisation hit of the costs for my vision, the vision sort of died. But here we stand. I have a fully stripped back frame that's been sandblasted and cerakoted. It now has a hardy coating that resists a lot of wear, and I've even tried my hand at splatter paint again, although it didn't turn out quite how I envisioned. I've added new decals and everything is ready for the frame to be assembled. I'm going to continue on and put most of it back together. It's not going to be a complete build, but it's going to be something someone else can pick up and build into the bike they want. All the rust is gone from the frame, the bolts are free, and hopefully it should just be something easy to finish. It's going to be on eBay for a little bit now. I'm basically just listing it for the cost of the Cerakote, so if you fancy it, go take a look. I'm going to leave the rest to run now and pop back for a quick roundup. So enjoy the rest of the video.
try and get that on. That's not too bad. Okay, so basically that's the swing arm that this bush is meant to be glued on. Okay. Pin. Yeah. Nice. Hey, where does this go? Ah, shit. Where does that go? Does that go on there? Ooh. Okay, here's the a little bit came out.
And there it is. It's a weird one. A weird way to end a video after coming so far, but I'm really having to think about costs now, and it's sort of a lesson to anyone watching this. Cheap bikes like this come up all the time and they're very tempting. Without proper planning, costs can soon add up, so do your research and plan ahead. Even when buying parts, I apparently missed something because the axle centre spacing is too long for the bottom bracket. I do really love how this bike has transformed, and I'm sad to see it unfinished, but I need to pass on the baton. If you made it this far in the video, thank you. I hope whoever buys this project gets some solid use from it, and hope you enjoyed watching the video. I'll catch you in the next one.